organization and concerned organization of Warren and 180 counties regarding air quality. And I have a question for Mr. Frank.
Are you asking a question or are you making a statement?
No, I'm just introducing myself to your court reporter as part of your legal process. I have a question for Mr. Frank regarding air quality.
Frank has left.
Mr. Frank has left.
He was excused because of death today.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm going to stand with his family. No, I have a question for Mr. Frank. You're denying my rights to ask a question of the air quality expert.
All right. What's going to take place is Mr. Frank is left. However, the board is going to allow further questioning of the two experts that the board is hired with reference to any questions that anybody in the audience has with reference to air quality.
Will Mr. Frank be returning at a subsequent meeting?
He can be presented, I'm sure, at the next meeting.
If at the conclusion of this evening's proceedings there are still questions remaining for Mr. Frank, we'll make sure that we produce them.
And I'm stating that there are questions for Mr. Frank.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Excuse me? Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
That's really great.
Other than that, the floor is open for questions from our experts. If you'd like to question that. Anyone?
Yvette Day, 32 Meadowview Drive. And I just wanted to do a follow-up. Mr. France started to ask a question about what happens if there is a violation and what is the state's requirement from the DEP on what happens after that. And I was just wondering if you wanted to finish your question to our panel of experts with regard to that.
You can answer the question.
Well, I don't want to overstep what his question was going to be, and then if I have additional, I can do a follow-up. If you don't mind.
I can gladly ask a question. You can follow up if there's anything you want. I guess my question was along the line is if there is any incident at the facility and there's a violation, and if it's a self-reporting violation and or somebody called the number to report it, what does the DEP do in that situation? And besides the violation and or shutting the plant down for a certain time, or what's the process? What happens?
The process typically is one in which there'll be a DEP employee, an inspector will be sent to the facility to investigate the violation, whether it's an odor violation or any other violation. I've had to respond to those calls in the past, including sending inspectors to my own town to inspect facilities in response to local complaints. But they're taken seriously. Every complaint to the DEP hotline is logged, a paper record is created, and the responsible officials have to actually record what they did in response, what they found when they went to the facility, and so forth. And if there's a violation, there's severe penalties for violations, obviously.
What's the turnaround time between the notice that there is a violation and or a
typically try to respond typically
from a phone call to it gets to the DEP to they come out. What is the turnaround time within that?
It should be a matter of less than 12 hours. In the case of an odor violation or an opacity violation, they try to get someone out there right away because a lot of those violations are, obviously hard to catch. So you want to, you basically DEP get someone out there as soon as someone's available.
I apologize if y'all can't answer this, maybe you can, but has there been a protocol put into place within their application of what the company will do if they so find that there has been emissions or dust violations or anything to that? Is that in the application itself of what they are going to do before the DEP steps in?
There are provisions in the permit that require the operator to notify the DEP in the event of certain circumstances. For example, if they see visible emissions or dust, they're supposed to notify the DEP via the hotline themselves.
Are they still able to operate as normal with that out in the open?
Well, typically what you would do, what they would have to do in accordance with their permit is that if they see something, they, I'm just reading it, bear with me. It doesn't necessarily say that they have to shut down, but if they have to call the hotline, and so at that point they've self-disclosed that they have a violation. If they continue to operate in that manner, the penalty that's assessed would reflect that it's occurring from the point they called until they rectify the situation. Does that answer your question?
I believe so. So the DEP comes out and they say they find something that needs to be fixed. How long does the state give them to fix that problem? Is it 1 week, 2 weeks, a month? How long? What's the maximum time that they have to remedy a situation?
The penalties are done on a per-day basis. So every day that they remain in violation, they wind up having increased penalties, which, depending on the severity, can be tens of thousands of dollars per day. So the incentive is really a monetary one for them to fix it right away, because every day that goes by, the penalties ratchet up.
Okay, do we know what the maximum penalty is for carcinogens being released into the air? Do we know what that penalty is per day?
It's the same for across the board for all violations, and it was recently increased. It used to be $25,000 per day, and I believe it's been increased to $50,000 a day. But I'll double check that. But I think that's the figure.
Thank you. Did you, Mr. France, did you have anything else that you wanted to say as far as violations went?
No, I think the important thing is if the plant is out of violation, they are required to self-report, as we've heard. With that self-reporting, if somebody's coming out, or if it was reported from the public, an issue there, if they have to come out within 12 hours or even less, and should say this is an omission thing, I mean, I think that puts the risk low for us as residents. Somebody is required to come out from the DEP. To me, that's the important part. Now, if the answer is we don't come out for a month, that's going to be a concern for all of us. But the issue here is they're going to come out within hours in certain cases and 12 hours in other situations. So I'm comfortable with that, because I think the response from the Department of Environmental Protection is here to protect all of us, as residents. And I think, to me, I'm satisfied with that.
But the only penalty would be a monetary penalty. It wouldn't be the penalty of shutting down the plant, where they could make more money to pay for that penalty.
Yeah, but if it's a $50,000 per day penalty,
that's the very maximum. I mean, you could be talking about dust theft, which could be maybe $2,500. We might want to find out what those penalties are, what they are per day, and see, weigh it out. You may want to weigh it out.
For violations that present a threat to public health, the department does have the authority to go to court and seek shutdown of the facility as well.
How long does that procedure take?
And in addition to that, citizens can go to court if there are violations that they don't feel that are being addressed satisfactorily by the DEP.
Okay, thank you.
Mark Corral, 37 Meadowview. For our experts, I have a general question, again, looking at the air permit. They have a stack height there of 30 feet for this facility. It's my understanding that the facility is actually going to be built on a hill. On a hill that will slope down. And my question is, do you feel that that stack height is enough with the facility sitting on a hill? The stack, if 30 feet is not very long, is the stack tall enough, or will those emissions actually be emitted basically at street level if you're on Stryker's Road?
Part of the DEP protocol that I talked about earlier, where they assess risk, stack height is in fact one of the parameters that they look at, and they're looking at exactly what you just described, making sure that the term is proper dispersion of the, the gaseous emissions into the atmosphere as opposed to just at street level. And based on my review of the application, yes, I think it is adequate given the velocity with which the emissions are going to occur.
So let's say it's about 15 feet above the ground. That's high enough?
Yes.
Thank you.
David Corrado, 44 Highlands Way, Lopatcong. I just had some questions about the noxious emissions. And we talked about visibility and also the bag filtering and stuff like that. The gentleman before, who seems very knowledgeable, brought up a number of chemicals, and one that I know for a fact is carbon monoxide. That is odorless and invisible to the human eye. That's why we have carbon monoxide monitors in our house. I wonder what other of these chemicals, could you name some of the other ones that are invisible to the human eye and are odorless?
Yes, all of the gaseous emissions that are represented in the permit are odorless and invisible to the eye. And it's carbon monoxide is one, you're correct, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, certain sizes, not the dust, but the gaseous particulate. So all of the elements that are identified in the permit would be described that way. They're not visible, and
So how does this visibility protect us in any way? We're not monitoring these, and we can't see them and we can't smell them. So those are the most dangerous chemicals, and we have no recourse to tell whether they're being emitted.
There's no facility where you can see the emissions, and that's why the state has the air permitting process, so they can evaluate your estimate of what the emissions are and be able to say, no, I don't think you're right, I think they're going to be greater than that, or I agree, these are the levels. I know it's frustrating because you're wondering how are we going to know if we're doing the wrong thing because we can't see it, but we can smell an odor, we can hear noise, we can see dust. And really the only answer is that after the initial test, they do have to monitor that control equipment, the baghouse that we talked about, and they have to operate within a certain range. If they're outside of that range, then something is wrong and it's not functioning properly. Likewise, they have to do an annual adjustment of the combustion equipment where they do measure, not as sophisticated as a stack test, but they measure emissions. The other thing to consider too is that when you estimate emissions, there's a threshold. I mean, the numbers are represented here, and those numbers are worst case. So that's sort of the highest bar that would be emitted from the facility.
But what we talked about was that the filtering of the baghouse is filtering out 99.9% of the particulate matter,
right.
And all these noxious gases are going through that filter. They're being expelled into the environment, so they're not being filtered.
That's correct.
And there's no testing to tell us whether they're in compliance.
Well, there is testing. Initially, they don't have to just measure the baghouse for the particulate. They do have to measure the baghouse to get a reading specifically on the carbon monoxide, the nitrogen oxides, the total hydrocarbons. So they do have to measure those as well.
Is that every 5 years or how often?
Every 5 years is going to be typical, yes.
Okay. I was wondering, have studies been done about the distance that these chemicals travel from the site, based on different wind conditions and such?
I'm sure there have been. I'm not familiar with that. I'm not familiar with any studies that are specific to the fate of the transport of these emissions from an asphalt plant.
How about the collection of residues? Say there happened to be a school less than a half mile away to collect on the play equipment and things like that our children would be touching on a daily basis.
Well, these aren't the type of emissions that are going to result in a residue. I mean, you're talking about the...
Well, he mentioned some sort of oil particulates, I mean, the oily substances that are launching.
Something that heavy, that it does like that, it's going to settle very close to the source. It's the fine particulates and the gaseous emissions that will travel. So there's not going to be anything depositing. Anything that is heavy or of that nature will deposit right at the source. I mean, not a half mile away.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Juniper Langford, 32 J Lane. I just have one question for you guys, and if you'll humor me. If you could just explain, in a worst case scenario, in the event of an accident, there's a fire at the plant. I would like to know what the short-term and long-term ramifications of that to our air quality. What happens? What's emitted? How long does it take to dissipate?
I don't have exact numbers for that scenario. I just think, thinking reasonably, if there's a fire in the short term, there's going to be emissions, and that's going to be the short-term effects, just like any other fire, any other location. It would be a discrete incident, so long-term effects, I really have no information or data on that.
Right. I'm just curious because clearly we've discussed all of these compounds and chemicals that are going to be on location and the dangers of them escaping from the facility. So clearly if the facility is on fire, they're all going to escape. So what happens to us when they do?
Well, one of the, in the testimony earlier, I forget who was asking the question, but there was reference to what's called the Community Right to Know program. And you probably wouldn't have picked up on the reference unless you're familiar with the program. But I think it was come up as a discussion of the MSDS, the data sheets for what's being stored. Industrial facilities are required to have an inventory of everything they keep on site, and they have to report where it's stored, how it's stored, how it goes off-site.
That's not really my question. My question is what happens when it explodes.
I'm getting to that. And the purpose of the program is to provide that information on an annual basis to emergency responders that are in the immediate vicinity of a facility. And that gives them information in the event of an event like that, like a fire, so that they understand the materials they're dealing with and how to address them, and that they're prepared. They know where they're located on site, they know the nature of the materials. So that's one tool that's in place to mitigate the effects of an incident like that.
So in your expert opinion, if there were to be a fire and a very disturbing fire, let's say the entire plant catches ablaze, our air quality will be okay, quarter mile away, half mile away, the next day?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that question.
I'm just curious, because I just don't think it's responsible for us to enter into an agreement without knowing exactly those sort of risks we're taking on. Even if they're 1 in a million, I think it's something we need to know. So I'm sorry that you didn't answer that.
Can I ask a follow-up question along those lines? Is it a fact where a lot of the emissions that's coming off is due to the natural gas burning, and that natural gas, in the event of a immediate fire situation, if the gas was shut off, you're not emitting those emissions because the natural gas is not burning? Is that a way of thinking of this, or not?
That would be one scenario. If there was a fire related to the combustion, you're right. I'm sure the natural gas supply, as soon as that's shut off, that would eliminate that source of emissions.
And that's where I think a lot of the emissions that we're talking about is yes, through the natural gas burning process is a lot of the emissions we're talking about.
Yeah, the majority of the emissions in the permit are due to combustion of natural gas. Correct.
So are you saying that asphalt is not highly flammable?
Asphalt, in terms of as it's being stored on the site, I'm not familiar with that.
Well, when it's stored in bins, it's complete, it's done, it's ready, it's asphalt. Is it flammable?
I'm not familiar with how it's rated. There's different ratings on the I'm just not familiar with the rating.
Well, my question was really the long-term effects. And
well, maybe someone who's familiar with the asphalt operations would be if they...
But then they'll tell me that they're not air quality experts.
One at a time, please.
Thank you.
Richard Rumper, 99 Maisie Avenue. Can you tell me from their submittal for their permit what their opacity limit is?
Their opacity limit, no visible emissions.
No visible
No
emissions.
visible emissions.
And how long after you have a visible emissions are they allowed to operate before they have to shut down?
I believe we discussed this earlier. They don't,
just want
they have to notify within 24 hours.
So they could operate with opacity for up to 23 hours without having to report?
Well, the first thing they have to do under the permit is if they have a visible emissions event, they have to evaluate it and try to rectify it. If they can't rectify it within 24 hours, they have to call the NJDEP hotline. And then...
So if they, what you're saying is they have 23 hours and 59 minutes to rectify the situation before they have to report it to the DEP?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And are they specially trained to see opacity? Is there some kind of training that they have to go through?
There is, in some instances, a permit will require that they follow a specific method that EPA has for measuring opacity. They do not have to do that in this case because the limit is no visible emissions. So it's not
So there's no training for them? If they see emissions,
not required.
they have to report it. Now, the 24-hour time period, does that start from when the opacity starts or from when someone notices it at their facility?
Well, I think when they notice it.
Okay. And what about, how would that opacity be visible? I think yesterday when we were talking with their operations manager, a lot of their operations are going to be at night because that's when a lot of their asphalt is needed. What would that do to the possible visibility of the opacity coming out of the stacks?
It would not be visible in the evening.
It wouldn't be visible in the evening.
Right.
Okay. I think they testified that the reason that they only do 5-year testing is because the process has been approved, and that's how they know that they're not emitting any noxious gases coming from the plant. Do they also have 24 hours to run outside that process before they have to notify the DEP?
No. You're talking about the monitoring that they have to do on an ongoing basis?
Well, they said that they don't do stack testing, only do it every 5 years.
Correct.
Because the process has been approved. Okay, the way they do it, they monitor bag house and parameters, and from doing all that, they know that they're not emitting any hazardous emissions. Correct? Is that
correct? They know that their equipment is operating as designed. Yes.
Okay. So can they operate their equipment for 23 hours and 59 minutes?
No.
Okay. How long do they have from when their equipment stops operating optimally to prevent those emissions to either shut down or notify the DEP?
The requirement in the permit is that they operate that continuously. So if they identify that they're out of compliance, it's instantaneous. They're out of compliance.
I'm not sure I understand. So as soon as their equipment's out of process, the parameters, they have to shut down the plant.
No, they don't have to shut down the plant. They're out of compliance with the permit.
And when do they have to report that they're out of compliance?
They have to self-report that. That's not written into the permit. There's no time frame.
So they have to self-report, but there is no time frame.
Correct.
So how does the DEP know if they operate outside of compliance if they don't report it?
They don't know.
Okay.
You have to keep records of your data.
Who has to?
The operator has to
Okay,
keep
the operator
records
has
of
to keep
the
records of the data.
And if the EPA comes in and they say, I want to see those records, and the records aren't up to date, or if the records indicate operation outside of the range, then they're cited for a violation.
Okay. Are those electronic or are they handwritten, or you don't know? There's no way.
I don't know.
Okay. Maybe we'll get a chance to get the operations manager. Okay, just a few more questions. When a fine is given, levied, whatever they do, who benefits from that fine? So if they have an opacity violation in our town, a half a mile away from our grammar school, and they get fined, where does that money go?
I'm going to defer to Mr.
goes to the general treasury?
It does go to the general treasury.
So it wouldn't go to, would they use that general treasury to find out if any of those emissions got within the limits of our school? Or is that just something that it just disappears?
There are times when, in addition to the fine, or to mitigate a fine, a party will have, a violator will do what's called a supplemental environmental project.
A violator, you mean the plant that was fined?
If a plant is fined,
okay.
That violator may, in addition to the fine, do what's called a supplemental environmental project, and often those are oriented to a local environmental problem. For example, diesel retrofits have been, of school buses have been a very widespread use of supplemental environmental projects to provide some local benefit when there's a violation.
But that's totally up to the company?
It's a negotiation between the DEP and the company.
So the
based on the violation.
Negotiate for the township to get the company to pay for additional, I'm not sure the term I'm looking for, but...
It's possible. The best case scenario, obviously, is a no violation.
And in your recollection, how often has that happened in your years with the DEP? Is it a frequent thing, or is it on occasion?
I would say more on occasion.
Thank you. Richard Merker, M-E-R-K-E-R.
Chesky, 48 J Lane. One quick question to the air quality expert. Simple, really. Would you say, in your expert opinion, that the air quality is better with or without the plant?
There's less emissions without the plant.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Scott Leifer, 32 Jade Lane. Just to follow up to that fire question. If there are 70,000 gallons of liquid asphalt cement stored on site, what happens when it burns? A dump truck rams and ignites the tanks, and they all catch fire.
I think that might be a better question for an operations person. I'm not familiar with that.
What type of compounds or air pollutants are given off in that scenario?
I don't know.
Hydrogen sulfide be one of those compounds?
I don't know.
Does Mr. Campbell? You don't know. Do you know what the immediate long-term health effects are of hydrogen sulfide?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm sure it's dependent, just like on anything else, on the quantity, the concentration, the source of it, but no, I'm not familiar with that scenario.
All right.
Kenneth Dugan, 17 Sudbury Court. I have one question for the township, which is related to this. What I understood all my 40 years in this township, there was a noise ordinance in the township. It doesn't apply to this plant. If they run 24 hours a day, they make a noise. Well, let me explain something. I've been in this township for 40 years. I could stand in my yard and I could hear the trucks out on 22. Starting and stopping on the highway. Traffic in the morning going to work. It's just the noise, for some reason, in this area vibrates so much and spreads out so much. I could hear the band playing at Phillipsburg High School. You know, it's ridiculous. And we're going to put a plant that's putting maximum air, sound pollution in the area. And it's going to affect everything. You won't be able to open a window. You won't be able to sleep at night because of all of this noise, and it does make a lot of noise. With bulldozers running and trucks, very noisy. I don't know anyone. It's really a terrible situation. But I don't think any of these people want the noise and the pollution in this township.
Mr. Louis Cardamona, 1119 Fifth Avenue, Alpha. Susan Angill, how may I address you? Mrs. Doesn't matter.
Ms. Angle, Susan, whatever you like.
Okay, Susan, thank you. Call me Louis. Am I to understand the testimony tonight that there will be precursors of smog emitted by this plant?
That is correct.
Okay, and somewhere within the vicinity they will actually combine and actually create this smog?
The chemistry of ozone formation is very complex. When EPA and the NJDEP talk about air quality issues, for example, ozone, fine particulate, things like that, they're always addressed in a regional manner. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of factors that contribute to the air quality in an area. I mean, I was, sort of a little bit coy with the last gentleman that asked, would the air quality be better or worse? But the fact of the matter is, it's a very complex situation. Here in Warren County, I'm sure you're familiar with being downwind of the Pennsylvania power plants. There's stationary sources, the cars on the road, that are probably a more immediate contributor to ozone, and there's also sources that emit and contribute. The reason it's addressed regionally is because you can't look at a snapshot of that coming off the plant and necessarily be able to predict at what point the formation happens and it contributes to smog. But to answer your question, emissions of CO and NOx are precursors for ozone.
And as
I'm sorry, emissions of VOC and NOx are precursors to ozone.
And I understand there's a conglomerate of other ozone products from other facilities migrating into this area. This will be just an additional source.
It is an additional source of ozone, of NOx and VOC. Whether it impacts this immediate vicinity, that's what I'm saying. It's very complex in terms of when that formation occurs and how it actually impacts the air quality in a given area.
Thank you. In relationship to the baghouse, and it was specified tonight by the previous gentleman who had to leave, that there's like a 7.5 micron, that smaller than that particles will actually be escaping.
I didn't hear him say that it was 7.5 microns, but I'm sorry.
Are you knowledgeable about the facility's baghouse?
Not to that degree of specifics, but if it has a micron limit, then anything smaller than that will move through the filter, yes.
Are you familiar with the ionization of sub-visible particulates, ionization knocking it out of the air?
Ionization or condensing out of the air?
Maybe condensing might be the term.
Yes, particulates are present in two forms. Filterable, which is sort of the dust, something you can see, and then the very, very fine particulate, which is gaseous. And you hear it described as PM 2.5 most recently. When that enters the airstream, that is when it can condense out, and that's the concern with PM 2.5. It's the condensables that come out that are the health risk factor.
And this facility will be emitting a certain amount of those type of products?
It's not necessarily PM 2.5. PM 10 is what's represented in the permit.
Okay. I think it was said that heavy particulates would stay on the site because they were heavy.
Well, what I was trying to say...
I was going to just qualify my question. What about if there's a windy day? Does the dust and the heavy particulates stay on site?
No, sure. I mean, wind is a contributing factor. What I was trying to explain that if you have dust that you can see, I mean, that's heavy. That's not going to travel very far. If you have a very windy day, that is going to obviously cause more transport than on a day when it's very, very calm.
Doesn't it testify that it's the things that you can't see that are the most dangerous now?
Yes, from a health risk standpoint, the dust that, you know, we talk about fugitive emissions, fugitive dust, that is not typically discussed as a health concern.
And on a windy day, those products would actually migrate off the site.
I don't know. I mean, there's things that mitigate that. For example, they talked about that the aggregate is wet and it has a certain moisture content. So all of those are in place to prevent it from doing that.
Okay.
Those measures.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Do I have the name right? Campbell?
That's correct.
Okay. You did testify a little bit about the stormwater and the general permit. I believe that your testimony was just not on air, it's also on stormwater.
That's correct.
And then you mentioned that there's 2 football fields away from the actual buffer zone, approximately 700 feet or so.
That's correct.
Thank you. And you said, you know, there's a science of runoff. Does the science of runoff also include the geology and the subsurface structure of runoff as the water migrates through the rock formation that's under?
It's really, I was referring more to surface runoff.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if the science of runoff that you're testifying about also includes water that may actually drain out through the rock substructure, as water might percolate through the rocks, not just what actually flows on top.
Well, to some extent you want water to percolate because that keeps the water on site and also contributes to recharge.
Are you familiar with the geology of the site or the general area?
I'm not familiar with the geology. I've been told that there's a significant limestone formation.
Have you heard or seen of the study that the EPA did on the Lopatcong Valley that came about because of the Highlands landfill near Washington and how they did a study on the whole site?
I'm not familiar with that study, no.
Okay, thank you. What is your experience in enforcing asphalt plants?
In enforcement?
Enforcement.
Well, I was responsible for enforcement for the entire state of New Jersey when I was commissioner, and for 5 states in the District of Columbia when I was at EPA. We did not, during that tenure, have significant non-compliance that came to my attention as a persistent matter. That doesn't mean there weren't violations, but I can't testify as to how many violations there were specifically during that time.
When you were at the New Jersey DEP, were you aware of any violations at the Bridgewater Quarry asphalt plant that Mr. Franks testified was, in his opinion, a comparable facility?
I was not specifically aware of that at the time.
Thank you. Is it really true, either of you, that odors are not allowed to leave the plant site?
The express terms of the permit, I can defer to Ms. Angela, but the specific terms of the permit refer to no odors or other nuisance emanating from the site.
And how does the permit handle the odors that are emitted when loading the trucks?
It doesn't matter what the source of the odor is, it's still prohibited under the permit.
And that includes asphalt trucks, the trucks that are carrying the asphalt when they're leaving the plant?
It includes any kind of odor that comes from the plant.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Martin Sweat, Fort Byron, Lopatcong. Mr. Campbell, in your initial remarks, you mentioned comparing, I believe it was the permit to an ordinance. Which ordinance was that?
I was referring to the reference earlier that the ordinance will require them to get all DEP permits, as I understand it, that in addition to whatever provisions any ordinance approving this or approving the project, if it were approved, would include a requirement that they receive all DEP permits. So even though they're required to do so by state law, no matter what, they would also be required by the ordinance. That was the limited nature of the reference.
It's a future ordinance.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Thank you.
But they would be required by state law to get that permit no matter what, whether it's in the ordinance or not.
Let me just to explain for a second, right? I think I explained the other night that if this is going to be approved and we do a resolution, one of the things we always do on our resolutions is to make as a condition DEP approval for any certificates or approvals that they need from the DEP, whether it be water or sewage or whatever it happens to be. So that's also part of it.
Okay, same ordinance. All right, thank you. Mr. Frank was able to testify with non-expert knowledge about audio levels. Do you have the same non-expert knowledge, or should I wait for?
Well, I'm familiar with the statute, which is 65 decibel limited fence line and 58.9. So, and that's generally enforceable. State law.
And that's consistent with what Mr. Frank said, particularly that 50 at night was his level. And what's the unit of measure for that?
Decibels in the A scale, dBAs.
dBA. And do you know the typical character of the noise level for trucks at 50 feet?
I don't. I know that 65 decibels is essentially the equivalent of two people conversing, or a person speaking at normal voice level. But I don't know what the decibel level of a truck is. But whether it's a truck or any other form of equipment, it would still be subject to the noise ordinance.
Okay. And Ms. Engel, you stated that the plant emissions are highly controlled to acceptable levels. Did I recall that correctly?
I don't know if I said highly controlled to acceptable levels. It would be considered a highly controlled plant in that it exceeds federal EPA standards, and it also meets New Jersey's criteria for state of the art.
Would it be fair to say a plant that meets those levels has a non-zero but acceptable risk to the population?
Yes.
And this is not in reference to emissions from the stack or the plant in any way. And I don't know how familiar you are with the site, but assuming there's open storage of gravel or components of asphalt on the site, would anything blow on a windy day from those storage elements out? Anything at all?
I can't say for certainty that nothing would ever blow off the site, but what I do know is that the materials inherently have some moisture in them. And again, that's something that's going to make them less likely to blow off the site. And again, materials of that size and diameter are not just going to be picked up by a light breeze and blow off the site. That would have to be a significant wind event to blow the piles that they're talking about storing off the site.
Yeah, I was just referencing dust from unwashed gravel in however small amounts leaving the ground.
Again, it could occur.
Could occur. Thank you.
Catherine Marcaccelli, 10 Hayes Way, Lopatcong. And I have two questions, fairly simple. One is for Mr. Palmer. I'm not quite certain. You said that the plan is approved, or in the event that we approve the plan? In the event. Okay. And a question for Mr. Campbell. In your experience in regulation, what locations are the asphalt plants in New Jersey?
I can't testify to what the locations of asphalt plants generally are in New Jersey.
Okay, so generally you can't testify that in all of your experience in the regulations of them. You can't testify to general locations.
They're typically located, as to the extent of my knowledge, which isn't encyclopedic. I can't tell you the location of every asphalt plant in New Jersey. But they're typically in industrial areas, much like this one, which is surrounded on one side by a manufacturing plant, on the other on the other side a concrete casting plant.
Okay, so this area has been decided by the planning board that it's an industrial area. No?
Well, the current character, I've been to the site. The current character of the area includes facilities.
So
on the
would
other side,
communities such as,
like
for
industrial.
example, Upper South River, Short Hills, do they have asphalt plants near them, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. Yes, my first name is spelled with a C, not K, just in case. It's Catheriney. My last name is Marcuccii.
Leslie Franzak, 527 Goldfinch Terrace, Lopat. I wanted to find out from you is, when you're talking about the air quality, is there ever a sample taken, a physical sample, not a monitoring by a computer system, but a physical sample?
Yes.
Taken, and how often is that?
Under the terms of the permit, they have to take an initial test where they will actually have to physically sample the air that's coming off of the stack. And when they renew the permit, they're going to have to do another one. That's typical, but they have to do it once every permit term, so once every 5 years.
Okay, and is that the DEP that's doing that, or is that the plant that's conducting that test?
The process for that is that the owner would hire a stack testing firm, and the stack testing firm would submit a protocol to the state of New Jersey that outlines the methods they're going to use to collect the sample and to analyze the sample. And those methods are published, they're very prescriptive. You have to follow a certain procedure. The DEP will review that protocol and either have comment or ask for more information, ultimately approve it. And at that point, the stack test is scheduled. And every stack test in New Jersey is witnessed by the DEP. So the owner or the stack test firm, whoever, would coordinate that with DEP. The DEP would come out to the site, the test would be conducted, the third-party stack testing firm would submit the test report to the DEP, and I believe they have to be signed by a professional engineer, and the DEP then evaluates the report and determines whether it is acceptable or not acceptable. If it's not acceptable, they notify the local enforcement agents, the enforcement office, that the stack test occurred and they didn't meet the requirements. That's the process.
Okay. And what would cause a recommendation by, I'm not sure it was the DEP, but from a smokestack being raised from 33 feet to 120 feet? What would cause that recommendation?
I'm not aware that recommendation's been made, but typically when, that's a pretty big increment to go from 33 to 120. But there are instances where a site will be required to raise their stack height so that there's better dispersion of emissions, meaning they're brought further up into the atmosphere.
And for the board, what impact would that have on your decision? Or something like that, just keeping that in mind.
Resolved, so I'm going to try Lopatcong. For the record, as a former member of Lopatcong Township Industrial Commission, this area we're talking about is classified as our industrial area, so there's no increase in that.
Was he an expert?
Testified.
I'd like to ask you a question. Your air quality. The question is this: all the plants that you've been to and you've seen, you talked about enough risk factor of the air emissions. Have you ever saw or ever seen any of the workers at the plant using any type of correct respiratory devices? I doubt it would be needed by OSHA if there was any type of air quality, they work up close.
Right, I mean, I'm not expert in OSHA requirements, but you're right, that is the agency that will dictate whether or not workers needed to wear protection and what sort of protection they needed. And to my knowledge, that these sort of plants would not trigger that level of protection.
So you've never been to any plant where you saw any of the workers that work up in close work or?
I've been to plants, and I mean, there are plants where people are working in environments, where they have to wear protective equipment. Not an asphalt plant. I'm thinking of a different.
But not asphalt plants, right?
No, I mean, if you just asking me generally, there are situations where people are required to wear respiratory equipment based on the nature of what they're doing. In terms of the day-to-day working, that would be not typical. That's not a setting you want your workers to be in.
So in other words, what I'm trying to get at is that the air quality was really bad, or was really harmful risk factor. I would think OSHA would come into your company and make mandatory for your people to wear a respiratory device. When you're paving down on the roadside and you're laying down the material, does any of the workers there need to wear any respiratory mask required by OSHA or POSHA? Thank you. This next question I'm going to ask Mr. Campbell.
Could you hold on, please? Sure.
Another question I have is this, Mr. Campbell. Knowing about this plant, anything that there's been some concern about, runoff to the Lopatcong stream, any leakage off that would be harmful. My question would be this: it is now a farm field where there's corn or soybeans, and the farmer comes in and he plows in the springtime, all right, which bears the ground. And then he applies a high concentration of nitrogen and potassium or whatever potash that's in the fertilizer. You have rains. You not only have the pit, you have herbicides, insecticides that he sprays, the off-spread. And if you have a rain and that material runs down into the stream bed, would you say that's pretty harmful? I mean,
agricultural runoff can be, especially if it has fertilizers in it, can be harmful to water quality, yes.
More so than probably what this plant would ever possibly be able to?
Well, the difference is that runoff from this plant, unlike an agricultural field, will actually be subject to controls and regulation. So there are specific parameters they have to meet, and the stormwater water has to be controlled in ways that it wouldn't off of say a farm field or even a...
Right, so there's more controls of something like this than there would be to apply or these types.
Correct, yes, there would be.
Thank you.
Richard Byrne. My follow-up question about your personal protective equipment. Do any of the emissions coming out of the stack when it's operating, do they immediately fall down, or do they get dispersed with the wind?
No, they won't fall down. They will be dispersed.
So the people on the site would be least likely to be affected by the emissions coming out of the stacks?
From a stack.
Okay, and a question for your operations manager. Do any of your operators work at the top of the stack while the plant is operating?
No, but they put down the hot material, the paper, and they're right on top of the hot material and walkers.
I'm not worried about the material when it comes out of the plant.
The question was asked about personal protection on the laydown operation.
That wasn't my question. My question was, do any of your operators work at the top of the stack where the emissions are coming out?
They sit on top of stuff? No, of course not.
Okay, thank you.
Barry Glassman, Phillipsburg Riverview Organization. Just the same follow-up question.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could we just ask this gentleman to put on the record whether he's speaking as an official representative of the organization with that authority, or whether he's speaking as an individual?
Would you identify that, sir, please?
I'm speaking as a concerned citizen within the vicinity of this plant, and also as the vice chair of Phillipsburg Riverview Organization.
Where do you live?
I live in Stewartsville,
All right.
500 Victoria Place.
Are you speaking,
Sorry, that's right.
are you speaking on behalf of that organization?
Yes, I am.
You are?
Yes, I am. Just a follow-up question regarding the potential wearing of gear. Very insightful question, but it made me think. Because OSHA does not require the workers to wear gear, protective gear, does that automatically guarantee that there's no threat to the workers at all times, just because OSHA does not require them to wear gear? Specifically,
You know, I can't speak as an expert to OSHA regulations, and I think I wouldn't use the term gear that broadly, because we were talking about respiratory equipment.
and that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, okay, because there's gear
Categorized
like,
as gear.
right, okay, because there's gear like steel-toe boots and hard hats and things that are
Good
likewise required. But I can't speak to OSHA regulations and what they may or may not dictate.
Right, considering that OSHA in the past has not required some workers in some situations to wear protective masks or gear of that nature to protect against what might be in the air. People who have worked around asbestos, OSHA didn't require it until they actually discovered that there was a real issue, or Legionnaire's disease, hotel workers, things of that nature. So the fact that OSHA doesn't require it, I was just wondering if you wanted to comment. Is that an automatic guarantee that there's not a health risk to them at all times?
I think that would be better answered by someone who has more expertise in OSHA than I do.
Correct, and it's probably not a guarantee.
My name is Bill Rosebrock. It's R-O-S-E-B-R-O-C-K. I live at 14 South River Terrace in Harmony. Is there a appeal process for air permits? Can the public appeal the issuance of an air permit?
The public can request a hearing on it, on any final decision by DEP.
Was there a hearing in the deliberation process for this permit?
There was, I believe there was not a hearing in the context of this permit.
Does the state have the authority to require continuous stack monitoring for emissions?
They would have the authority to do that if they promulgated a regulation requiring it, but the regulations that are currently in force do not require continuous emissions monitoring for this type of source.
How about for
typically required for major sources?
Like a power plant?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Is the applicant at any time required to submit or provide a health snapshot for the citizens in the area of permit? For example, would the applicant have to inform you if there were, for example, an elevated incidence of asthma among school children?
There is a piece of the air permit application where they're required to represent the health risk that's associated with the emissions.
What about existing health conditions?
No, that is not part of the application.
Does this application make any reference to the landmark asthma study that was conducted nearby by Dr. Stanley Weiss of UMDNJ?
No, in submitting the application used the NJDEP protocol to assess health risk, and the health risk was below thresholds at the fence line, and so there's no further action, and there's no mention of it in the permit.
Is there ever a situation where the quality of the air is so bad that you could issue a moratorium on any new air emissions permits pending improvement in the air quality?
under the issue of air quality alert or what?
Typically, the way that's managed is not that there's a moratorium, but that new facilities, for example, areas that are in non-attainment, new sources have to essentially come up with offsets for particular pollutants for which they're in non-attainment. So it's not so much a moratorium as a system where you have to show that you're offsetting those reductions by, any new source from reductions in other areas, but only as to the particular pollutant for which the area is in non-attainment.
Are there any sinkholes on this site or nearby?
I'm not aware of any geotechnical studies having been done for this site. I don't know if the applicant has conducted any geotech work.
Yes, there's been a geotechnical study done and submitted.
Were there test borings done as part of that study?
Yes, there was.
Thank you.
Martin Swing, 4 Byron Drive, Lopat. This may be what is called a point of order. Assuming the participation of all the board members is required, I wish to note that one of your board members is falling asleep. I'll leave it to your judgment on how to handle it.
John Kane, 429 Hamilton Drive, Greenwich. I wanted to get back to what you had said regarding the measurements of the plant. These are software-based measurements, is that correct?
No, that's not correct. These are actual physical measurements where someone will use a device that extracts the air from the stack, collect it in a bag, and send it to a lab for analysis.
Every, the constant testing, not the every 5 year testing.
Right. The constant testing is a gauge, and I'm sure the operations people can describe that better. It's not, it can be linked to a software program where that information is downloaded, and that's how the records are kept.
So if this gauge is not functioning properly, gases can be leaking into the air for 5 consecutive years.
It's got nothing to do with controlling the gases. What it's in place for is to indicate whether the baghouse is operating properly. So if you see it out of range, that tells you either there's a broken bag and it's not operating properly, or it's plugged in some area. It's used to determine, the gauge is used to